Good afternoon. My name is Mike Gardipe, and I am shocked that you got the last name correct. So thank you very much. I don't know who prompted you, but it is my honor and privilege to address this board today. I've heard a lot about the board, and I couldn't be happier at the honor that you guys invited me in to talk about a very compelling subject area here. I'm sure everyone is going to be just flabbergasted on the edge of their seats for my description of a statutory law. So I am here invited to speak about something called a Natural Resource Damage Assessment, or NRDA, or damage assessments, or as I like to refer to it, restoration versus remediation. So this is a restoration piece. Basically, I also, before I get started, I want to just make two plugs. One is I was handed something that I was quite impressed with, and that is the environmental report for 2012, not 13, but 2012 for Los Alamos. And it's a summary of the type of environmental surveillance and monitoring and the condition of the environment that is up at the lab. And it sort of links in with the discussion I'm going to have today, because it's all about environmental protection and protection of resources. And so some of the data that we use as a trustee council comes from actual data from reports and you know, the other Intellis databases we have, and so on and so forth. And so I invite you all to grab a copy of this. It was actually written by several students that Los Alamos hires, and thus it's very good reading. It's at the appropriate level that I could even understand. And so I just want to introduce that. The other object is we are having a public meeting tomorrow night at the Cities of Gold. And no offense to this casino, but it starts at 6 o'clock tomorrow night. And the subject area of our public meeting tomorrow night is natural resource damage assessment. Specifically, the trustee council has introduced to the public an assessment plan. And I'll get into it in my presentation. But I do want to invite you all out. Our notices have gone out in newspapers and so forth. And there's a comment period associated with it that started on November 14th. It's a 30-day comment period. So, without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about NRDA and what is the goal. The goal of NRDA is to compensate the public for losses in trust resources resulting from an injury as a result of a discharge of oil or release of a hazardous substance. So what does this really mean? What it is to restore, replace, or acquire a lost resource or the services that resource provides in the services. And a compensation is measured in terms of restoration projects, or in some cases, money to implement restoration projects. So I will get into a little later what restoration versus remediation means. So here's a boring slide. For those of you who are like statutes and regulations, this is your slide. Apologize for the mistake up there. There's no statutes up there defining what NRDA is. But to coin a phrase from my boss, essentially NRDA is CERCLA's drunk uncle that you never want to talk about. But I'm here to talk about it because CERCLA is usually associated with cleanups, and this is the restoration piece. Statutes are CERCLA 1980, although there are ties earlier to the Clean Water Act when they define natural resources and damages. And also the regulations were then set forth by CERCLA to the Department of Interior to develop the regulations. And these regulations we follow. It's sort of our guidebook on how we're going to implement. And so there's other guidance that exists: Oil Pollution Act, Park Service Protection, Marine Protection. And I would say the most noted NRDA damage assessment and claim that's going on in the country right now is the BP oil spill, and it's affected the coastlines everywhere from Florida to Louisiana and Texas and so forth. So by far and away, it is the largest claim, it's the largest assessment going on, probably in the history of the country. So I want to define for you guys what this means. And it comes down to this sentence. The regulation, what does it allow for? What is a claim? So I'm going to cover four different, whoops, let's see here. So I'm going to define what a trustee is, what damages, injuries, and resources. But it allows trustees to collect damages for injuries to resources. And so what's a trustee? Well, a trustee is an official of a federal, state, or Indian tribe that is designated under blah, blah, blah to act on behalf of the public or the entity, i.e. tribal government, that the public, they're holding a resource in trust for. So who is on our board is the following trustees: the Pueblo of Jemez, the Pueblo of San Ildefonso, the Santa Clara Pueblo, the state of New Mexico, the U.S. Department of Agriculture acting through the Forest Service, and of course ourselves. And we all have designees. We are all trustees for the resources that we are in charge of. So what are injuries and what are damages? So the trustees collect damages for injuries to natural resources. Well, what's an injury? It's a measurable adverse impact or a change to either the chemical or physical quality of a natural resource resulting either directly or indirectly from a discharge of a hazardous substance. And what's the damage mean? What's the damage? The damage is the amount of money or a suite of restoration projects that are sought by this trustee council to compensate for the injury, destruction, or loss of a natural resource or service thereof. So what are resources? Resources, simply put, is land, fish, air, water, biota, groundwater, drinking water supplies, and other resources that are managed by or held in trust by blah, 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 controlled by the United States or other local governments or foreign governments or any Indian tribe. So examples: surface water resources, groundwater resources, even geologic resources, and of course biologic resources, which, it's the services of animals, fish, birds, etc., mammals, and air resources. So why is NRDA important? Well, NRDA restores these resources and their services to the way they were prior to a release. And think about the oil spill, the biggest NRDA thing out there. So their goal there is to restore wildlife and the human use and the recreational use and even commercial use to the way it was before the oil spill. So the same thing here. Why is this a little different from remedial efforts or remediation is our remedial program can remove a risk, but it may or may not compensate for the loss of that service that a resource provided. So the next slide will, oh wait, I have to give credit. Photos taken by San Ildefonso Pueblo members. So that's kind of cool. What is the difference between restoration or NRDA and remediation? So I'm assuming that most of this board understands or knows the concepts behind what Los Alamos is doing in its cleanup efforts. And so what in the heck is restoration? Well, the differences are that NRDA is not remediation, and it's not even a term for like a second cleanup. It's a bit different. It's restoration versus remediation. So a remedial goal is, goes off, the object is to protect human health and the environment from unacceptable harm. And most of our cleanups at Los Alamos are based on a risk level. We're removing risk to a certain level that we deem, the public deems acceptable. NRDA, however, is based on restoration of the resources back to their baseline condition. And so remedial decisions, they can consider restoration objectives, but they have to be closely coordinated between the trustee, who really, the Board of Trustees or the Trustee Council, really govern how restoration is going to occur. And remedial decisions are a different ball of wax. It's more compliance-driven. In our case, at Los Alamos, it's the compliance order on consent, and other EPA and so forth define what we do or do not do. Another example is a more aggressive remedy in the remediation side. It can reduce the scale of damages on interim losses, and damages can take into account the effects of the remedy. So let's just say that we dig up more, or we do a better job, a quicker job of remediation. Well, that lessens the effect of the amount of restoration we may have to do in the end. And so as such, the regulations also show the restoration can include actions to address collateral injury from a remedy. For example, if you're out there cleaning something up, I mean, there happens to actually be a damage or a potential damage to a resource you're trying to protect. And now, hopefully it's short term, but NRDA takes that into account. So you want to do your remedies, you have to take into account what loss of resources during a remedy. So it's kind of unusual in that aspect. Both goals are to clean things up and restore the environment, but yet. So here's a graphic that sort of shows what we're after here. So this green line is what's known as a baseline service level. And so let's just say this is a population of fish or a human use, or even groundwater services that the services that groundwater would provide. This red line represents what is lost in the ecological services, and the goal of NRDA is to compensate for this area here. And the goal is to restore a lost resource, like a population of fish or mammals or whatever, to rekindle their growth back to the way they were before or but for a hazardous release. So the difficulty with determining what a baseline level is you have to take into account how would this resource have been anyway. Droughts, fires, the natural development that would have occurred anyway, but for the hazardous release. So, why I'm here today is I represent Department of Energy as a natural resource damage trustee on the Trustee Council. And the Trustee Council is embarking down this road of NRDA, and here's where we're at. We are approaching the assessment phase. We have done a pre-assessment phase to date where we have confirmed that there is a potential of exposure of natural resources, and we are in the process of assessing what this might mean. The next phase will be the post-assessment phase, where we have really determined the nature and extent of a damage to a resource, and at that point we plan for and implement restoration projects. So we are currently in the assessment phase, and let me just one other note here. As part of the assessment phase, before you run out and you do a bunch of assessment studies, i.e. go out and look at populations of birds that may have been affected or quality of groundwater or anything else, you have to have a plan to do that. The Trustee Council has embarked on this effort for the last year and a half to publish an assessment plan. We are all comfortable with our draft assessment plan, our damage assessment plan. And what that plan consists of is those studies and activities we feel need to be embarked upon over the next several years at Los Alamos to further define the assessment. So tomorrow night, if you all show up at Cities of Gold, you will hear details on what our plan consists of. The assessment activities, in a nutshell, are where the Trustee Council wants the assessment phase to go. Is we want to study to start. We want to study all the existing data that's out there for site-specific environmental and contaminant data. So our assessment plan has taken a step in that direction, and they have looked at a lot of data. However, there's what, about 1,000 studies that have been done through the history of Los Alamos on various biota and contaminant and resource regimes. And the contractor that we hired for our assessment planning, we did not pay them to go through the literature in great detail to determine what is the actual impacts to resources. And so that is our first task of the next phase. And from that, we will then further delineate what additional studies will have to be done. So, for example, more in-depth analysis of environmental media, surface water, groundwater, et cetera. What human use studies are necessary to see how humans use these resources. Actual field studies, if necessary, of the biota. And then, you know, just basically need to understand what's out there, and it will further direct the council to make recommendations on what studies we perform. So, and then what's the result of the assessment? Well, that helps shape the scope and the scale of what restoration is going to be required at Los Alamos. And again, this is separate than cleanup. Cleanup has a very active, you clean up to a certain risk level and then you walk away. Hopefully you're protective of the environment. Restoration takes another step to restore resources that could have been lost. So just a little mental note here, at any time, the assessment plan that we're going to roll out to the public tomorrow night, we can change the plan at any time during the assessment. If something pops up, if there's an interest in something, we can always change the plan to address it. So our progress is we meet once a month we meet as a trustee council, and we have ongoing analysis. Our products, as I mentioned before, are the assessment plan, and prior to that was a pre-assessment screen. And where we're at right now is we just issued our public notice November 8th. Our public meetings tomorrow night, Cities of Gold. The comment period is a 30-day comment period that started November 14th. Our next steps, get through public comments, release the damage assessment plan as necessary, implement the damage assessment, and then plan and implement the restoration projects. And here, I believe, is a copy of our press release that went out, our public notice. And so there is a website to visit, and there's also, we have put the draft assessment plan on our NRDA website and also at the reading rooms, including the CAB. So that's basically it. If you guys have any questions, and again, I want to invite you all. Sure, yes.
How much money have you all spent today? How much, from the time you started, what was the date that you all started putting this together? And how much money have you all spent? What are your estimates going to be as this thing progresses?
Well, that's a very good question that I don't For the second part of your question, I don't have a solid answer for it. The first, we started as a trustee council around 2008. And I started with the pre-assessment screen. And to date, in rough terms, about $2 million has been put forward to this NRDA process. About $2 million, all told.
Is that just for LANL?
No, it's for trustee council members. It is actually for the contractor that was hired to do both the pre-assessment screen for the trustee council members and also the assessment plan, which is a pretty thick document and a lot of studies went into it. And so, again, I am one member of the trustee council, and all of these products are trustee council. I mean, it's their product. So, yes, sir.
Was there, I must have missed something somewhere along the, oops. I must have missed something somewhere along the route, but was there a series of oil releases?
No.
Or
It's hazardous substances. And so it's just, it's release of hazardous substances, although it does follow under OPA and some of the other statutes.
So
really
this is a theoretical study?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
we are not to a place to say that there are actual damages or that there are lost services and lost resources. But where we are at is that we are to a point where we are releasing an assessment plan to further assess the scope, boundaries, nature, and extent, if you will, of any resources services that have been lost.
Okay, now there was a release down in Albuquerque at the Air Force, that the Air Force released, that's still a problem.
Are you
Would
talking-
that fall under this?
That
That's not oil.
That I don't know. I thought wasn't that a rocket fuel plume? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about that, but on our trustee council is a representative from the state's Office of Natural Resource Trustee, and that might be a very good question to ask the state. They would be the ones that would sort of go after that, or it might be of interest to them. I don't know enough about the nature of that to answer your question.
Mike, do you have a projected budget? I don't know if I pinned you down on that yet.
Well,
but
yeah, you tried.
I tried, didn't I? Okay, let me go get my thumb screw. So anyway, do you have any idea? And I'm
wish
not
I
trying to
did.
pin you down, just
I wish I
have a
did.
guesstimate?
I wish I did. My initial take is somewhere, somewhere between $2 million and $25 million to get through the assessment phase. That doesn't have any correlation to what restoration would cost or what a damage might be. We're not there yet. And we're struggling what the budget's going to be because our number one task, as I indicated, is to direct the contractor to study the litany of studies that have been out there that Los Alamos has published. And then report back to the trustee council the results of those studies and recommend areas to further study. And so that could be a minimal effort. It could be a bit more. So we're trying to be flexible in what we project. And believe me, my contracting folks are just trying to pin me down as well. Mike, tell me what this is going to cost. Give me some idea. And the best I can do is, it's going to be roughly probably $2 million on the low end to get through the assessment phase all the way up to maybe a $25 million effort. We don't know. Sorry. Manuel, were you next, or who was next?
Mike, what kicked in the pre-assessment screening? Is it because of the inception of the council?
I'm going to have to, that's a very good question. I should know the answer. I do not know the answer. I can get this board an answer. It's a bit before my time. There were compelling reasons, I believe, to enter into a pre-assessment screen. And I think it was the council had formed and then disbanded and formed again in 2008. And I don't know all the nuances. And I apologize for that. But we'll try to get you an answer.
That's fine. Thanks for your honesty.
Yeah, if you can't restore a particular resource, because they have buildings built on top of it or something, can you then restore that service somewhere else, and that counts for restoring what was lost by a particular effort?
Compensatory restoration. There's a thing called primary, and then there's a thing called compensatory. Primary restoration, and this probably should have been in my presentation. I know you guys are so interested, but primary is where you actually take site A. Like, let's just say, I heard you all talking about Area G. Let's restore Area G into this pristine, habitat area for a lost resource. And, well, the problem is Los Alamos is an operating mission site, so it may not make sense to do primary restoration. So the answer to your question is yes, you can compensate by doing a restoration project off-site to get an equivalent restoration credit for the lost resources on-site. And it's, I think it's safe to say that will come into play at Los Alamos if there are indeed, it shows there are restoration necessary.
Nana's got a question.
Yes. Nona?
Hi. Is this to do with a specific event or time period, or to do with all the operations of LANL since the Manhattan Project started?
Very good question. And again, this should have been part of my presentation. It kind of was with the statute slide, but CERCLA was enacted in 1980. And so the regs sort of provide for events that have happened post-1980. It's not that black and white, though. There may be cases where the damages or a loss to a resource is indivisible. In other words, you can't divide. And in those cases, and I cannot cite examples, but there are provisions that there may be examples where you go pre-1980. The Trustee Council, this is one of our topics that we discuss regularly as trustees, and there's some difference on the council. And it's one of those things we continue to talk about and see what our data comes out. So it's a good question, but in general, it's 1980 and beyond. Who's next?
Mike?
Okay.
So, might some things be better now than they were in 1980, but worse than they were before LANL started doing things to these resources? And how would that play into this whole situation and the restoration?
Boy, I wish I had, I wish I was knowledgeable enough to address all of that, but the DOI, the Department of Interior regulations, provide a path that we follow as trustees to determine what damages are. And so if you want to go, I don't know if I can get that back on, but I'll go back to the graph. That graph basically starts right here. 1980 would be where this starts. And so the divisibility or not would be this sort of this fuzzy, is it lost before and how much after and that kind of thing. But your question was, well, what if in 1980 it was better, right, than pre-1980, yet worse than when LANL first operated? Did I capture that? Yeah. So unfortunately, the regulations in that case, we would only be looking at the loss of ecological or whatever resource services from 1980 on, okay? So in that case, we only look at the loss post-1980, so the reference is, was there a loss starting in 1980, getting worse and getting better? That's what we would look at. We wouldn't even look at prior to, so. The green line is baseline, right, right, right. Yeah, and again, how predictive of it is it on a resource? There's fluctuations, and you know, I heard a compelling talk about the status of our trees as a resource on the Jemez Mountains and in the western states, and it's horrible. But that's habitat for resources, and so that's a compelling presentation I heard. Very very disturbing, but that's sort of a baseline example of how would, for example, the pine trees and the ponderosa pines, as an example, how have they fared in their natural state, and how will they fare? And so that's baseline, whatever that is. If you're going to lose them, that's your baseline. But if they're able to survive drought, for example, that's your baseline. Now, what did a hazardous substance do to that condition? And
Two more
that is
questions,
this.
and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah. Who's next? Okay.
Does this assume a 1 gallon spill, a 10-gallon spill, a truckload of spill? What, you have no units up there. What does that mean?
Okay. So it has nothing actually to do with quantity of spill or contaminant. It has everything to do with the effect that spill had on a resource. What is the viability of the resource? What happened to that resource? That's your measure, not the quantity of spill or oil or gallon or 5 gallon. Your measure would be in terms of acre years of lost habitat or populations of birds, etc. That's your measure in restoration. And we have a contractor that does this for a living. And this is what they eat, drink, and live. And there's a lot of literature that they use to explain this in more detail. And I'm not doing it service, but I can tell you that the measures we use are not the same measures you would use in the cleanup program, where you look at what spills have occurred and how you clean them up and what is the nature and extent and to what level do you clean them up. These measures are in terms of a lost service of a resource.
Mike.
Birds, bunnies, fish, human use, lost acreage, wetland, whatever it may be.
Real quickly, Mike.
Yeah, who's next?
Okay,
John?
I'm going to hammer you one more time.
Okay.
Okay, have you, under the terms of, and I'm trying to pull this out of the air here, but under the terms of DOI and what normally when you're assessing damage or whatever, have you already had pre-filings for compensatory remediation yet?
No.
No, you haven't. Nobody's done that.
No.
Okay.
We're trying to, is the nature of your question have claims? No.
The compensatory claims.
No.
Not yet?
No, we are working as a trustee council to determine what those claims should be. We are working, what's the word, collaboratory? Pete, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, Mike, and Mike, Mr. Gardipe is correct. This is very different from what happened to the Department of Energy down in Albuquerque years ago when the Attorney General filed a $5 billion lawsuit against a variety of parties, DOE included, in the South Valley. This is a collaborative process where all the trustees have agreed essentially to what they're called tolling agreements, which means they will defer any potential litigation rights that they have in favor of trying to work collaboratively towards a resolution of NRDA claims.
So do you have an appointed ombudsman on the federal level that oversees what's going on with your panel?
Mr. Chairman, these are really good questions. What we have is a statute that appoints the Secretary of the Department of Energy as the trustee. That authority, to my knowledge, has not been delegated down to the authorized officials. So ultimately, things need to go back up from Mike and I back into the Forrestal building with the Department of Energy. And then...
But to answer you further, I don't believe the Department of Energy oversees the trustee council board or
no,
yeah.
the Department of Energy participates as a trustee. Mike, did you talk
Yes.
about the two roles that we
Yeah,
have?
I did not talk about our other role.
Okay.
I talked about our trustee role.
We have two roles. We're a trustee, but we're also a potentially responsible party. And when we are meeting with the trustee council, we are in our trustee role.
And that is the reason why I brought up the reason for the ombudsman. And then any type of case that may come out of this is the reason why there is an attachment of such. So anyway, I won't get into it anymore. But something to think about if somebody would let me know, please.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, Mike. Bonnie?
So I get it in my head, so you're a trustee that goes and meets once a month.
Yeah.
You're a trustee and you meet once a month with your trustee council who is, is there more than one trustee for, you're just LANL specific trustee?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, just off the top of your head, if you knew for CERCLA, how many trustees are there that meet? I mean,
This is a slide that attempts to answer that question.
but that's
So-
for LANL. I was just curious. So
Oh.
do you have any? Do you just meet with the Department of Energy
So
trustees?
we are the trustee council for Los Alamos NRD.
Then my question is,
So
how many
so it
people?
doesn't go beyond. So there's 6
Okay.
entities here.
Okay. So
Department of Energy and 5 others.
I got you. So then how many trustees are on your council?
So there are only 6, and although our meetings may have more people, for example, Pete and I might show up, but Department of Energy is one trustee, and Pete and I are representatives of that trustee. And so it's Flynn, Secretary Flynn is the trustee for the state of New Mexico, correct?
Correct. The governor has appointed the Environment Secretary to also wear the hat of State Natural Resource Trustee. So in that role, Secretary Flynn serves as the trustee for the state's natural resources, not just at LANL, but statewide.
Right. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else?
No, no.
Or- no?
What other potential responsible parties are there?
At this point, we are not, the trustee council has not sought other potential responsible parties. And I don't want to venture what they may or may not be, because we're not even to the stage where we know exactly what our lost resource services are. So, I mean, right now, Los Alamos, I mean, this is centered about Los Alamos and the releases that have occurred at Los Alamos and any potential loss of a service of a resource with Los Alamos and even emanating from Los Alamos. So, unlike CERCLA, the other, I guess not the drunk uncle part of CERCLA, but CERCLA seeks all potential responsible parties for cleanups. And that is not necessarily the case with NRDA claims. So I'm not saying that there couldn't be others, but I'm saying that is not an area we've gotten into so far on this trustee council.